It's lesson 13. This is part 2. This will be the final part of our lesson. So we've gotten our simple API working. We can see we can get a single product. We can get all products. So it's actually the same same endpoint, same URI or URL, with or without a parameter. Now, when we call get products, notice right now it just gets a list by product ID. So if we want to get a list alphabetically of our products alphabetically, the same way we had in our web project, we can just make a small adjustment here in the controller. So we'll scroll down to line 28. This is our get all products method. So what would we do in here if we wanted to order our products alphabetically instead? Because when we run this query right now, it gives us a JSON object, but our products are just listed by primary key. So what would we do if we wanted to sort this list alphabetically instead? Remember, yeah, we would just add an order by. Thanks, Pahua. Right? So just like with our web scaffolding, doesn't mean that we're going to leave everything exactly as it is. We may want to make some adjustments. So we'll just add an order by with our lambda expression. So if we order our query by name, we could then go back and refresh in the browser, and we should get the same list of products, but in a different sequence now. So I'm just going to add that order by clause in. Okay, so now notice my IDs are not in sequence, but we are alphabetically from avocado down to sushi at the bottom. Now, whoops. Why might we actually do this? I guess we probably should have asked this question earlier. What would be the benefit of us even building a web API like this? How might we use it? We've already got this working front end. Right? We've got a web application that works. Okay, yes, Eula can be a little. Can you expand on that a little bit? So we can manage the products through the web. So what's the benefit? So we could sell the API. Okay, like to who? Why might somebody else want to use our API? Okay, yeah, we could sell the subscription. Yep. Okay, the HTML is for the user. Ah, Manjinder, that's what I'm thinking, right? Let's say we want to build a mobile app. So you can shop our store. The mobile app, rather than connecting directly to our database, it can simply consume the API. Or maybe someone else that has a grocery store wants to be able to sell our products in their store. We don't want them to have direct access to the database, but we want to let them retrieve our data. Okay. I can actually show you an example. This was actually a student project built by a web student and some programmer students a few years ago. It was a research project done here at the college. So here's the front end. So this is mostly for students who can find kind of like Uber for work in the hospitality industry. Right? So they can search for shifts and they can apply for them. So here's the mobile app. So the front end was built using the Ionic framework. So it's basically HTML, JavaScript, CSS. But the back end of this service, I can actually show you the Git repos of what the back end of this application looks like. So here's the mobile app. So the code's written largely in Angular. It's all JavaScript. So for example, here are the employers. Here's our code in JavaScript. But our backend, we use .NET Core to build the web API. So we've got all the models, employers, opportunities, skills, ratings. And then we've got API controller. So if somebody wants to, for example, a new employer signs up, we've got our API route and our authentication. And then we've got get with an ID, some other get methods, get with the sorting. We've got put for updating an employer, post, and delete. Well, this is a pretty big application, but Matt, it's just the same thing as what we've done. There's just more tables and more models. That's all. The actual structure, what we are doing here, is the exact same thing as what you're seeing. So this is the back end to this app that's been installed over 1,000 times. It was actually built by students here at the college. Okay, so the back end service is all a .NET Core Web API. Okay, so we can easily test our get methods in our browser, but we also want to test the post, the put, and the delete methods. So to do this, the easiest way is to use some kind of REST client. There's a number of them out there. I know Attila mentioned he uses a plugin in Visual Studio Code. There's lots of plugins. I like this tool called Postman. So I'm going to give you a minute. If you don't have a REST client, you can go and install Postman. Maybe give me a thumbs up. I'll just pause the recording for a moment. So go ahead and install Postman. There's other ones. There's Hopscotch. There's another one called Insomnia. All the REST clients are similar. So it doesn't matter which one you use. You want to try Hopscotch or you want to try Insomnia or something in Visual Studio. It doesn't matter. Just install. Sorry, thank you, Amar. My apologies. So you know what? I'll quickly just do that again. I'll make another product, update it, and delete it. No problem. Okay. So I'm going to take out, just go right back to the beginning. We can get our products. I'm now going to make a new product. Okay that I do it again. So I'm going to change my method to post. And I'm going to change my body to raw and JSON. I'm going to make a simple JSON object here for a new product. So I'll give it a name. Say banana. I'll give it a price. 99 cents. I'll give it a weight. 0.6. And I'll give it a category ID of 4, which is our produce category. I'm not going to provide any product ID. I'm going to let the database assign it when my new record gets created. I'll make sure my method says post, raw, JSON. Here's my JSON object. Okay, now we'll try that in a moment. So now I'm going to submit, and now I get product ID 203. To try and update, I'm going to copy my new product that gets returned. I'll paste it into my request body. I'll add my new ID parameter to the end of the URL. I'll change the method to put so we can do an update. And now I'm going to raise the price. Put up my price 20 cents. And then to do an update, I'll send my put request. I get a 204 no content. But now I want to look in the database to see, did the price of product ID, did the price of bananas actually get changed? So I can toggle my method back to get to do a lookup and see what does product 2003 look like now. So I'll send it and I can see my price has been updated. Now, Nam mentioned if we try and do a put without any ID, well, no, it won't change anything. Let's look at why, right? Because we're calling put, but there's no ID. So in this case, right, I get method not allowed. We can't call put without any kind of ID. If we go and look at our scaffolded code, it says if ID, if this ID and this, if those aren't equal, we get a bad request. So it isn't going to do anything. You can't do an update if you don't have an ID. Just throws an error. It's not allowed. You can't call put on the whole data set. You can only call put with an ID. The last thing I'm going to try is the delete. So I'll change my method to delete. In our API, we can see that delete also requires an integer and ID parameter. So if I call delete on product ID 2003, it says it returns no content. That's just because of the SSL certificate. It's just networking. And now if I call get, it now returns a 404 because product ID 2003, it doesn't exist anymore. Because Manjinder, when you call the URL, when you call this URI, you also have to specify which method you're calling. Are we calling get, post, or put? So the HTTP method determines which method of the API runs. You can't. So if you don't supply the method, the default method is get in HTTP. Well, in the browser, you can only call the get method. This is why we had to use Postman. All we can do is call get. So in order to test the post, the put, and the delete, we needed Postman because it allows us to change the method as well as provide a request body. This is why we're using this tool. Yeah, Manjinder, I'll show you. Let me show you an example from my JavaScript class. Okay. From my JavaScript Frameworks class, I'll show you. So, bear with me while I find the project. Okay, so what does this actually look like? So here we've got I'll show you the front and back end. So this is in ASP.NET. So Manjender, here is my controller. So we built a music library. So notice the different methods here. So we've got a get, router.get at this URL. This goes and fetches all the artists and returns JSON with a 200. Here's the post method that accepts a request body and creates in the database. There's a delete method, the same URL, right? Notice delete and put, same URL. So how does it get called in code? I will show you. So here's how we would call it in JavaScript. So the delete method, for example, calls this.http. It calls the delete method, and then it passes in the URL or the URI. Okay, so it's calling this URI, but the HTTP method is delete. For update, notice the URI is the same, but the method is put. So when we're calling the API, not only do we have to provide the right endpoint, but we have to specify the method. So get, post, put, delete. Yes, that's right, Manjender. Nah, I can't really answer that question. I don't use it, so I don't really have an opinion. Okay, so our building of our API, I mean, it was easy. We just scaffolded it. All we had to do was make one little change to add the sorting. The rest of our API methods, they all work without any changes at all. So we can do create, read, update, and delete. So we're going to do one last thing with this, which is use the Swagger tools, which we'll install in our project, to generate some documentation that's kind of like Spotify's documentation. Because if we're going to build an API, we need to document it so other developers know what the endpoints are and what the methods are and what the parameters and return types are. So there's a link I put up here. You can read about Swagger and OpenAPI. So OpenAPI is the specification for documenting REST APIs. It's been around since 2015. Swagger is a tool that uses OpenAPI to automatically generate documents for us. So they'll look something like this. And it's got this subcomponent called Swagger UI that will generate an HTML and JavaScript document file right within our project. So if someone's building a mobile app and they want to consume our API, they can read the Swagger docs to see how it works. So we're going to go ahead and do this. This won't take us very long. We got about 5 lines of code and we're done. First, we need to install the Nuget package for Swagger. So we'll click on Tools, Nuget Package Manager. We're going to manage the Nuget Package Manager, manage Nuget packages for the solution. We get this window that we're becoming familiar with. So we're going to search for a tool that works with Swagger. Yeah. We're going to search for Swashbuckle, which is an awesome name. Throw it in the chat. So under the Browse tab, search for Swashbuckle. And we want this library. We want Swashbuckle for ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Core, 146 million downloads. We only need it in the global grub project. We're not using, there's no API in the test project. So you don't need to install it in the global grub test project, only in global grub. No, version 6 is fine, actually, for this. You can pick version 5, but version 6, it doesn't require .NET Core 6. So I'll just use the latest stable. This one, swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. So I'll install it. I'll accept the dependencies. And then we're just going to need to build our solution so that the Swashbuckle and Swagger and OpenAPI packages are available. So build your solution. And then if we open up our startup file, we just need a few lines of code to configure Swashbuckle and Swagger. So we'll open up our startup file. We're going to need one line of code in our configure services method and a few lines down in our configure method. API docs. So in here, we're just going to enable the service. So we are going to add the Swagger generation tool. So that can just go somewhere in our configure services method. I just put it down at the bottom of that method. And then we need just a few lines in the configure method starts, Swagger, we inspect any API controllers, generate new documentation file. So we're going to call use Swagger first. And then we're going to use the Swagger UI. We'll just set out a few options here. We're going to set the Swagger endpoint. And then we give a title, a string that will appear as the name of our documentation file. So this will be global grub API. That's it. Swagger's going to do the rest of the work for us. So once I save this, just build my project. Yeah, in configure services, it's services, we are adding the Swagger generation tool. And then we're using Swagger and we're using the Swagger UI tool. So how does this work? Like this, we just go to our root domain /Swagger, and it inspects and it finds, so it shows our model classes. So we can see all the data types and validation rules, what's required. And then it shows the endpoints of our API. We can even use this like Postman. Okay, I will in just a moment. Here, I'll leave it up. We'll go back. So we're calling use Swagger and use Swagger UI, and we're setting out the endpoint and then just a title. This is the name that appears at the top of our documentation file. Thanks, Mahir. It's the endpoint, so it's a URL to the document file. It's how do we access the Swagger documentation? We have to define a URL for it. So now we can see the methods, right? So our get API products takes no parameters. It returns a 200 success, and it gives us a sample of what the response data will look like. We can even try it. This is like having Postman built right in. If I click try it out, I can actually execute the API method right here. So I'll run it. It gives me a 200 success response. And here's all of the data in the product table. It also shows if we want to create a new product, it says our method takes no parameters, but here is the here's a sample JSON object for creating a new product. And then it goes on to document get, put, and delete for an existing product. How to select it, how to update it, and how to delete it. So anytime we make changes to the API, build and restart our application, the Swagger document will get regenerated. So if we change it, and here's where the title shows up here, select a definition. So if we make new API controllers or we make changes to our methods, our document is always going to be up to date. So if somebody wanted to integrate with our API, we can just point them to this URL and say, well, here our Swagger will document for you. Yes, it does. So let's look. Let's try it, Yulia. So if I go to delete, wants me, if I click try it out, this works like Postman. So if I put in an ID here of 2002, and execute it, it gave me a 204. Well, yes, normally you would want to authenticate. We would require, well, in this case, we wouldn't. You could add that functionality. We would just want to add security around it. Right. We'd want to let administrators do it. But we would add security. So normally we add security with something called Json Web Tokens. So something like this. This article's a little bit old. But it explains how to use these kinds of tokens that Spotify uses, right? Remember when I tried to get an artist, it says my authorization failed because I didn't have a token. So we would use something like Json Web Tokens, and we would only issue them to administrators, for example. Right? So there's role-based authorization. So we could generate a token only for administrators, which we would then add into our API. So we haven't required any kind of authentication. In a real site, you can see here, we are authorizing it only for, we've got authorization here. So we didn't include that in ours. But normally we would include that kind of authentication. Yeah, I'm going to push this up to Git. So API docs with Swagger. All right, I promised to get you out of here by 1 o'clock. I have stayed true to my word. So again, our exam is next Tuesday. Make sure that you, there is a quiz on Web API. It'll open at 2 p.m. today. It'll be available till next Monday at 5. So make sure you do that quiz so that you get those easy marks. If you have any questions, I can stay in the room for a little while longer. And if not, good luck with your other exams this week.